Madam President, this amendment, number 1062, is being co-sponsored by Senators Harkin, Senator Durbin, Senator Levin, Senator Leahy, and Senator Whitehouse. And before I speak on this amendment, let me begin by commending the chairman of the Banking Committee, Senator Dodd, and Ranking Member Shelby for introducing the underlying bill that we are debating today that, for the first time, would seriously begin to crack down on big banks and credit card issuers that are ripping off millions of American consumers by charging outrageously high interest rates and sky-high fees. The American people are saying loudly and clearly enough is enough, and this legislation begins to move us in the right direction. I would also like to commend President Obama for his leadership on this issue. Without his tenacious support for this bill, it is doubtful that we would have the necessary votes to pass this important piece of legislation, and we will have the necessary votes to do that. Madam President, under the Dodd-Shelby bill, credit card companies will no longer be able to raise interest rates at any time for any reason. Credit card companies would be banned from retroactively raising interest rates on consumers who are less than 60 days late in paying their credit card bills. This bill also prohibits credit card issuers from increasing interest rates on consumers during the first year after a credit card account is open, and it requires teaser rates to last at least 6 months, among many other things. Madam President, when I was the ranking member of the Financial Institutions and Consumer Credit Subcommittee in the House, I fought to end the bait-and-switch practices of the credit card companies for years, something we really worked on for a long time in the House, and I applaud Chairman Dodd for putting a stop to some of the most egregious practices being perpetrated by the credit card companies today. But, Madam President, while Chairman Dodd and Ranking Member Shelby deserve strong credit for standing up to the big banks and credit card issuers who oppose this legislation, in my view, this bill, as good as it is, does not go far enough, and that is why I am introducing this amendment today. Madam President, at a time when banks are receiving the largest taxpayer bailout in the history of the world, at a time when the Federal Reserve is providing banks with zero-interest loans, those same banks are now charging consumers outrageous fees and sky-high interest rates on credit cards and other loans. In other words, after taking $700 billion from the taxpayers, after getting zero-interest loans from the Fed, what these banks are now saying is, thank you very much, chump. We're going to take your money, and then we're going to charge you 25 or 30% interest rates. And all over this country, people are saying, sorry, that cannot be allowed to continue, and that is why we are here tonight. Madam President, today, one-third of all credit card holders in this country are paying interest rates above 20% and as high as 41%, more than double what they paid in interest in 1990. 19 years later, people are now paying double what they paid in 1990. According to a recent Business Week article, and I quote, Bank of America sent letters notified some responsible cardholders that it would more than double their rates to as high as 28% without giving an explanation for the increase. What's striking is how arbitrary the Bank of America rate increases appear, end of quote, Business Week. In other words, they are doing it, and I know many people in Vermont call up and they say, I paid my bills every month on time. Why are you doubling my interest fees, my interest rates? And essentially what the bank is saying, we are doing it because we can do it. We can do it. And that is not acceptable. Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and other banks should not be permitted to charge consumers 25 to 30% interest on their credit cards while they are getting bailed out by the middle class of this country. The amendment I am proposing today with Senators Harkin, Durbin, Levin, Leahy, and Whitehouse would cap credit card interest rates at 15%. The same interest rate cap that Congress imposed on credit unions almost 30 years ago. Under our amendment, the Federal Reserve would have the authority to allow credit card lenders to charge higher rates if the Fed determines that this cap would threaten the safety and soundness of financial institutions. In other words, the time is now, not tomorrow, not next year, but now, to have a national usury rate. As a nation, what we must say is that banks cannot charge people 25 or 30%. And as I've just mentioned, this is not a new idea that I pulled out of my ear. This, in fact, is what credit unions have been living under for the last 30 years. And you know what? Credit unions are doing just fine. I don't see them crawling in here asking for hundreds of billions of dollars of bailout money. They're doing fine with that regulation, and we should impose that same regulation on the private banks as well. Madam President, establishing a national usury law is not a radical concept. Up until 1978, about half the states in our country had usury laws on the books capping credit card interest rates. While these state usury laws remain on the books in several states, they were effectively eradicated by a 1978 Supreme Court decision, Marquette National Bank versus First of Omaha Service Corporation, which concluded that national banks could charge whatever interest rate they wanted if they moved to a state without a usury law, which is, of course, what they did. South Dakota, Delaware, other states do not have usury laws, and that's where these companies moved. Our amendment simply applies the same statutory interest rate cap on credit cards that Congress imposed on credit unions in 1980, capping interest rates at 15%. The National Credit Union Administration has the authority to raise interest rates if it determines that the 15% cap threatens the safety and soundness of credit unions. Madam President, it is also important to know that the concept that I'm bringing forth tonight is one that former Senator Al D'Amato, Republican of New York, who was then chairman of the Banking Committee, by the way, advocated for in 1991 when he offered an amendment to cap credit card interest rates. The D'Amato amendment would have capped all credit card interest rates at 14%. You know what? That amendment won on the floor of the Senate by an overwhelming vote of 74 to 19. That was back in 1991. And if that amendment received 74 votes in 1991, the truth is our amendment should receive even more, because the situation today is more egregious than it was in 91. And here is what the Republican senator, then chairman of the Banking Committee, Al D'Amato, said in 1991. He said, and I quote, 14% is certainly a reasonable rate of interest for banks to charge customers for credit card debt. It allows a comfortable profit margin, but keeps banks in line so that interest rates rise and fall with the health of the economy, end of quote. He was right then, and we are right now. Madam President, the Bible has a term for what we are seeing today. You know, I see a lot of my friends coming to the floor and quoting the Bible, and I don't often do it, but let me do it at this moment. And the biblical, in the Bible, quite often we see the term usury. Usury appears very often in the Bible, because not only in Christianity, but in Judaism, in the Muslim world, there is a reprehension against people who lend money out at outrageously high rates. There is a strong sense that that type of activity is not moral. In Dante's The Divine Comedy, there was a special place reserved in the seventh circle of hell for sinners who charge people usurious interest rates. So that is a warning, I think, for our friends in the credit card companies. Beware. Today, we don't need the hellfire and pitchforks. We don't need the rivers of boiling blood. But we do need a national usury law capping credit card interest rates, and that's why I'm proposing this amendment today. Madam President, I am not under any illusion that this amendment will easily pass. After all, the financial services industry has spent over $5 billion on campaign contributions and lobbying activities over the past 10 years in support of deregulation, and they are spending even more money today trying to prevent Congress from seriously regulating their industry. They are a very, very powerful force here in Washington, and in many ways, all of that money has got us to where we are today with the collapse of major banking institutions. Madam President, let me conclude by saying this. On April 24th, a few weeks ago, I sent an email to my Senate mailing list. And I simply said, tell me how credit card companies are treating you. We didn't know what kind of response we would get. But 3 days later, I had almost 1,000 responses. Many from, obviously, the state of Vermont, but from people all over this country. And I put out, I took some of these responses and I put them into a booklet. But let me just conclude by reading a few of those emails that I received. Donna from Neptune, New Jersey writes, and I quote, I want to know why consumers are not protected in any way from these predatory lenders who are bailed out with my taxpayer dollars and then turn around and raise my interest rate from 7% to 27% because of, quote, difficult economic times for the credit industry. This is outrageous. I have not missed a payment, and my credit rating is in the high 800s. How can they keep getting away with this? And Stephen from St. Johnsbury, Vermont writes, quote, a couple of weeks ago, Bank of America sent us a letter saying that they were going to raise our interest rates from 7.3% to 24%. The letter stated we could get our credit report to find out why. We received our credit report, and I still have no reason why they wanted to raise our rate. We did opt out, kept the 7.3%, and we destroyed our card, but we do not know what was wrong with our credit report. On and on it goes. Arbitrary actions on the part of credit card companies raising rates to outrageous levels. Madam President, there is a lot of frustration on the part of the American people as to what has gone on in Wall Street and, in fact, what's going on here in Congress. The American people want to know that we are fulfilling our constitutional responsibilities to represent the needs of ordinary people and not just major financial institutions who may make a lot of campaign contributions and have their lobbyists out lining the halls of the Congress. The time is now to say there must be a limit on credit card rates. The time is now to pass a national usury law, and I hope very much we will have the support of our colleagues in going forward on this legislation. Madam President, thank you very much, and I would yield the floor.